Training routines. Training routines, TRs, in Scientology. Training routines, training regimens, or TRs, are a series of exercises used in Scientology and its affiliated programs, front groups, such as Narconon, Criminon, WISE, and Applied Scholastics. According to Scientology, these drills are designed to improve communication skills and the ability to control situations. However, critics and former members claim that TRs use various hypnosis techniques, repeatedly exposing students to conditions that make them more accepting of abuse and more open to suggestion, helping to indoctrinate them into Scientology beliefs and practices. Early exposure to TRs. Most individuals are introduced to TRs during the Success Through Communication course, an introductory course aimed at teaching basic communication skills through these drills. The more advanced upper indoctrination TRs focus on the student's ability to control people and situations. Examples of TR exercises. Sitting drill. 2 students sit facing each other with their eyes closed for hours until they can remain still without movement or drowsiness. Distraction drill. A coach tries to distract the student both verbally and physically. If the student reacts, they flunk, and the process repeats until no reaction occurs for a certain period. Bullbait. The coach insults, teases, or provokes the student with abusive comments and sudden, potentially threatening physical movements. The student must remain completely unresponsive. Any reaction, whether emotional or physical, results in failure, and the exercise must be restarted until the student can maintain composure under intense provocation. Body control. The student moves the coach around a room using silent or verbal commands. Initially, commands are silent, but verbal commands are introduced later. Each successful command must be acknowledged. Resistance drill. The coach resists the student's attempts to move them. Physical force may be applied, and the exercise continues until the student fully controls the coach despite resistance. Ashtray command. The student repeatedly commands an ashtray to stand up and sit down, acknowledging each action. The goal is to move the ashtray with tone 40 intention, even though the student holds it. Control drill. The student moves the coach with verbal commands, overcoming resistance through physical control and mental intention. Specialist routine. TRL. Intelligence Specialist Training Routine. This routine trains individuals to convincingly lie, delivering plausible but false information with elaboration. Video demonstrations of TRs. There are numerous video demonstrations showcasing how various TRs, training routines, are conducted. One particularly insightful video is Scientology Indoctrination Methods Deconstructed, featuring 2 experts on destructive cults, one of whom is a former Scientology member of 9 years. Additionally, the video includes a former Scientology member of 27 years who trained others in various Scientology practices, including the TRs and auditing shown in the demonstrations. Below are some valuable insights and experts' commentary highlighted during these TR and auditing demonstrations. Proof of L. Ron Hubbard admitting that the Dianetic auditing process still in use by Scientology is a form of hypnosis. The Bullbait TR conditions a student to accept abuse, all to train conformity and obedience, because if you comply with this it sets you up for more and more levels of abuse. By being obedient, by doing the behavior, of these TRs, you're already changing the thoughts and the emotions, by agreeing to do the behavior, and, when I first demonstrated this, TRs, to a room of the top hypnotherapists in the world, they said, "That's trance, that's hypnosis." I said, "That's right," they were amazed. I said, "But they don't call it hypnosis. They call it communication." In an animal sense, what you've done is you've surrendered what's called boundary perception. So, you are no longer in a letting position, you are no longer in a position of an individual. You have accepted that you're part of the herd, you've accepted direction and you can trust the environment you're in. By agreeing to do this, you're already subjecting yourself to an unethical, pyramid, structured authoritarian cult that has designs on breaking you down and building you up in the image of the leader. The most significant thing about this technique is that it induces an altered state. It's not just that you're inducing an altered state of consciousness, it's that when you do that you're more suggestible to indoctrination and influence, so more beliefs, more manipulation can be done. But I've seen some pretty harsh, abrasive, emotionally abusive, sexually abusive things happen in these sessions, all to train conformity and obedience. Because, if you comply with this, it sets you up for more and more and more levels of abuse. It's very important that families who have loved ones in Scientology understand how systematic the cult is at programming people to resist normal healthy interactions. With the training routines, you don't just do it once, you do hundreds of hours of this stuff, and you keep redoing it, and redoing it, all the way through Scientology. That's a hypnotic technique, by the way. Repetition, monotony, rhythm back from the 20s, over. Auditors are supposed to do it daily. The first 9 months I was in Scientology, I did training routines every day, probably for an hour or two each day. I got quite good at it. This is conditioning, programming, mind control. Change the behavior, you'll change the thoughts and the feelings. The new beliefs are being implanted with a loaded language, and the person is complying, not realizing he's going to be asked to sign a billion-year contract. This is a hypnotic induction because you're dissociating, where you're keeping the cult intention and your words are different. They're creating a split of consciousness. This is one of the most standard hypnotic induction techniques taught. Look at the ceiling, slowly flutter your eyelids closed. And, it's usually all practiced an ethical way about breathing, take a breath, look up, let your eyelids close, then exhale, and as you do, you become more relaxed and comfortable and enter into a very comfortable state of trance. Most people are hypnotizable, but it's more about how it's happening, and who's in control, and whether there's a sense of safety. And, those words that the cult members are taught to read are meant to relax the person. You're aware of everything, don't worry, and won't be asked to do anything that you wouldn't ordinarily do. Whatever, but, that's kind of just nonsense, because people can be made to do all kinds of things they would never normally do in a trance, as we all know, in a cult. That kind of like telling the person what's going to happen in the session kind of sets them up for making sure that that's what happens in the session. In Scientology, they call it a reality factor, an R factor, or something. You're telling the guy what's going to happen next, or they just use the word indoctrination. This whole methodology is using an out-of-date, but in the time that Hubbard came up with this stuff, idea about the human brain and the human experience, that if you go back through an experience over and over, it's like your mind is like a battery and it loses its charge. And that is not how the mind works, and it is not an effective technique if you want to heal from any past trauma. It re-traumatizes the person until they are numb and dissociated about it. There's a technique called debriefing that was pretty thoroughly discredited in the 1990s and has changed all of counseling. The idea was immediately after something had happened, you would sit the person down and get them to recount it, to debrief it. And, what was found with people this had been done to were left with PTSD, whereas people who had just not asked anything had a better recovery. It's changed all of counseling. And the perversity is, in Dianetics, published in 1955, Hubbard explains this. He says that telling people to go through traumatic incidents traumatizes them. Then he's sort of, well, okay, let's do it anyway. Regarding the training routine, TR8C, that directs people to do things, programming obedience. Absolutely, and, if there is any resistance, you physically control a person to do it, which would not be considered ethical in most counseling disciplines. In L. Ron Hubbard's own words, from ACC lectures. L. Ron Hubbard has been recorded on audio directly saying 8C is designed to get the pre-clear student to follow orders without thinking, aiming for full compliance to commands without critical thinking, questioning, or hesitation. Hubbard says, well, that is the simplest look at 8C, the simplest rationale behind it, get the pre-clear to follow orders. Well, don't expect for a moment that your pre-clear is going to simply do this without thinking any thoughts or anything of the sort, but the truth of the matter is he's not supposed to think while he's doing this, but you don't have to tell him this, But if you catch him doing too much communication lag or too much figure, tell him, don't think about it, just do it. Laughs.